survey. There has been a significant increase in employee dishonesty in South Africa, which has meant that companies are turning to the polygraph for answers.
Employees obviously are used by companies to generate their income, to generate their wealth, and as such, employees are the biggest asset. But security being a human problem, it's not caused by inhuman objects. Security is then therefore a human problem caused by humans and has to be dealt with by humans. Theft is perpetrated, fraud is perpetrated by humans and not by machines or furniture or whatever the case may be. So therefore, the biggest threat to the security of any organization is posed by employees on the one hand, and or then external individuals trying to get into the company to steal or to perpetrate whatever other acts of crime. The polygraph as such has been developed over the past 110 years. It started back in 1890s, 96 I believe, if I remember correctly, when a person by the name of Cesar Lombroso conducted experiments with prisoners, and he devised a crude instrument with which he measured changes in blood volume when interrogating these people, and he discovered that when a person was actually lying, there would be a change in blood volume. From there on, the equipment developed. Back in 1916, a crude version was already used by the United States military, with which they caught a German spy during the First World War in the United States. It then was taken further, especially at the UCLA, where Dr. Leonard Keeler did a huge research or significant research on the polygraph, and he actually used a device comparable to what we have today in 1926 to catch an arsonist on campus. From there on, it developed further, the instruments and so forth, but also, especially after the Second World War, a lot of attention was paid and development work was done on the procedures and the questioning techniques and so forth. And a lot of research was actually done since the Second World War. And it has been developed to where we are today with the relevant question and the comparison question and various question formats that one can utilize in this regard. But in the end, it remains a relevant question compared to a comparison question.
The polygraph collects information from 3 systems in the body. Pneumograph tubes are placed over the chest to record breathing. Finger plates record sweat gland activity, and cardiovascular activity is recorded with a blood pressure cuff.
The polygraph is simply a recording device with which one records certain physiological activity that would generally take place within every human being. What we will be looking at is, first of all, cardiovascular activity, in other words, heart rate, blood pressure, blood volume and such. And we use an ordinary blood pressure cuff, as one will encounter with any medical institution, to record that onto a computer, such as this one over here. We would then also record breathing activity, and we use these 2 sensors over here. One is placed on the chest, another on the stomach, and it records breathing rate and breathing volume. And thirdly, we record what we refer to as skin activity, and one will use these sensors over here, placed on the fingers, and it will record the changes in the sweat levels of the skin. Now, any human being, when faced with any kind of danger, will immediately respond on an involuntary basis to the particular danger. It's referred to normally as the fight, flight, or freeze response. You've got no control over it. So the moment you encounter a real or a perceived threat, immediately the body will prepare itself to deal with the threatening situation. And what will normally happen is that there will be changes in heart rate, blood pressure, blood volume, breathing rate and volume. The mouth will become dry, pupils will dilate, hands will become more sweaty. One will get that funny tight feeling on the pit of your stomach, muscle tone will increase, and various other symptoms or changes in your normal physiological activity patterns that will take place. The polygraph is designed to confirm or reject certain critical elements of information. In other words, did you steal the missing money or not? That the polygraph is very good at distinguishing whether you did steal or not. The psychometric test is designed to display or to measure certain personality traits this individual has. So the psychometric test is, and obviously one gets various types of psychometric tests. In our case, we are working with integrity testing, and it's designed to give one an integrity profile of the individual. And it also has a predictive value. In other words, if one uses a psychometric test before appointment, one would be able to predict to a fairly great extent of accuracy whether the individual will be involved in unacceptable behavior in future or not. The polygraph is first and foremost a process, and the polygrapher is part of that process. So in terms of the accuracy of the polygraph, and a lot has been said about that, but more than 1,000 research studies have been conducted over the past 50-odd years, all of them published in peer-reviewed magazines. The majority of them indicate that the polygraph is, the validity of the polygraph, in other words, that it does what it's supposed to do, is around about 96%. Whereas the reliability, in other words, that you will get the same result under the same set of circumstances more than once, is above 92%. Now, one must also bear in mind that the majority of these research studies have been conducted in what is normally referred to as the absence of jeopardy. In other words, no real threat existed, because in order for you to do this research, you need to establish ground truth. And it's very difficult to establish ground truth in real case scenarios, because when do you decide the individual is actually truthful or not? So what normally will happen is that a case will be simulated, an individual will be given something to hide, and then the question will be posed to the individual, did you take this or did you do this or the other thing? And those figures that I've mentioned are based on these research done in the absence of jeopardy. This is galvanic skin activity, the sweat levels in the skin. This is the abdominal breathing pattern, and this is the thoracial breathing pattern, or the chest breathing pattern. Now, what we have here, if you have a decrease in the amplitude of the graph, there would be an increase in blood pressure, whereas an increase in the graph, the amplitude here, will indicate a decrease in blood pressure. When the graph rises, there's an increase in blood volume at the point of measurement. Now, those are typically the type of responses that we would be looking at. This blue line over here, the fingers, obviously with an increase, there's an increase in skin conductivity, in other words, more sweat is secreted. Then it is reabsorbed until we were back at the baseline. There would be another secretion of sweat with a reabsorption again, secretion of sweat, reabsorption. This is typically indicative of autonomous nervous system activity. On the breathing activity, one would typically look for suppression like this, where the volume of oxygen or air taken into the lungs is significantly decreased. One can clearly see over there. There's a definite response over there. Perceptions create certain attitudes. If you have the perception that you can get away with unacceptable behavior, the attitude will be created that whenever the opportunity presents itself, I will steal or do something unacceptable, and therefore the behavior will ensue. But if you have the perception that you will not get away with it, the attitude will be, I better keep my nose clean, and the resultant behavior will be acceptable behavior.